All right, today I want to talk about an issue that's fairly common and takes a lot of forms for a bunch of different processing disorders, but is a particular it's a particular factor that's gauged in the diagnosis of autism, and it's fairly prevalent for me. It was one of the big things that made me think, hey, something's going on here. It's sensory issues. So sensory issues can take a lot of forms. Mine are mostly sound and texture, and I'm going to go through that. Basically, it's just sensitivity to the senses. There can be sensitivities to light, to taste, smells, and I'm going to take you through of mine, so what some of that looks like, and then what some of the ramifications can be from experiencing sensory issues. So, as far as I'm very sensitive to textures, um, and it was always sort of a thing that felt odd, like, hmm. It was one of the main things I noticed when I was looking at different symptoms of autism when I was looking at, hey, maybe I've got this. One of the common symptoms listed was sensitivity to textures, and that's something that's been an issue for me my whole life. So I can kind of separate them into good and bad, and so I have a few good textures here. Um, Fur, dogs, cats. I've always really liked animals. Um, I actually used to my grandma always had dogs growing up, and I used to like fall asleep in the dog bed, like hanging out with her dogs. um, and I would always end up smelling like the dogs, which I think was not pleasant for people. But I really like how their fur felt, and I like petting her cats and whatnot. So, hey. Fur is one of them. I feel like the owl and the fish probably deserve some explanation. So I actually have an owl feather. I have a fairly extensive feather collection. I just find them in the woods and stuff. And some friends of my parents have like a forest on their property that a barn owl lives in. I've never actually seen the owl, but I found some of its molted feathers. And they're really, really soft. It's like it's beautifully soft, honestly. It's owls were one of my special interests for a long time. So I could talk all day about how awesome owls are. But basically, the softness of these feathers, particularly for barn owls, makes it so they fly completely silently. And they're actually so soft. The only part of the only external part of the body sensitive to properly appreciate the softness is your lips. So I clean the feather, obviously, but sometimes I'll just take it out and feel it. And actually, I can got it right here. So this is a barn owl feather, and this is not an episode about owls, so I'm just going to keep this to a brief anecdote. But basically, the edges of this are so soft, only my lips can actually properly feel how soft it is. So this is a good texture, very fluffy. And then when I was like 7, I had a betta fish, and I don't know if anyone remembers that scene in Pinocchio where Geppetto pets Cleo. I saw that and I was like, I guess fish are something you can pet, so I decided to pet my fish. And as it turned out, that wasn't a good idea. You're not actually supposed to do that. But his tail was very soft. It was blue and purple like this one. I named him Woody after Woody from Toy Story. I really love polished stones. Those feel really nice. They're very smooth. Sand is kind of a funny one because I'm not a huge fan of dry sand, but like wet sand at a beach close down to the ocean, I really love how that feels. When I was a kid at the beach, I would just rub it all over my body. Rose petals and velvet, I really like. I actually just sort of a funny sensory story as far as velvet stuff goes. So Joanne, the fabric store, used to have more like fabric samples that you could take of some of the nicer fabrics. So a lot of the nicer velvety fabrics, there were little scraps of it, excuse me, that you could take and sort of, I think the idea was take it home to compare to whatever project you happen to be working on. And so I liked taking those just because they were so soft. And I was like, I want to make a feeling quilt. My mom was like, what does that mean? She's like, I don't know. I just want to like have something so I can feel all these different soft textures. I didn't end up doing that, but I had a fabric scrap collection for a really long time because it's just so soft, so pretty. I'm going to dwell on this section much less. You'll notice a lot of these are arthropods. I have some interesting stories for some of these too. Um, First off, the Madagascar hissing cockroach, that's in the top left. Top left. I volunteered at a zoo for the summer, summer between middle school and high school. And one of the places the younger volunteers like me were allowed to work was in the insect house. One of the things that entailed was holding hissing cockroaches, and their shells are made of, it's chitin, which feels a lot like fingernails. It's very similar to keratin. And I can handle fingernails. I mean, I don't really know why this is so bad, but having to pick those little guys up was terrible. It was really, really awful. I could only do it with nylon gloves on. And even then, it was like, I don't want to hold this anymore. Don't make me hold this anymore. The only reason I ended up actually holding them was because there was a special like badge thing that the volunteers could earn, the Arthropod Aficionado badge. And I wanted to get it because I thought it would be cool. One of the things you had to do was pick up a cockroach. So I finally did. And fortunately, one of the older volunteers was super nice and was like, no, don't worry, I hate it too. You just got to do it. So I did. She helped me. I held it for a few seconds, and that was long enough to get the badge. But like I said, I had to put gloves on first because otherwise it would have been completely unbearable. And stink bugs, bottom left. These, I hate anything that will fly into me, and these guys are really terrible about watching where they're flying. They're super slow, super loud. That is, yeah. And yeah, the feeling of them on my skin is also really terrible. And if a texture is unpleasant enough, I involuntarily start crying because it's causing me sort of an embarrassing level of almost like pain. Even though it's not pain, my body kind of registers it as pain. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's just like it's so unpleasant. The only response my body thinks makes sense is to respond to it like I'm actually in pain, even if I'm not. So, stink bugs, cockroaches, tarantulas. I've never actually touched a tarantula, but just the idea, I've like never been brave enough to try because I start feeling little pinpricks up and down my hand if I even think about trying to touch one. I don't like things that aren't mammals or birds being fuzzy. It just feels wrong. So it's just ugh. And then yeah, oatmeal. I really hate oatmeal. I I didn't used to, but as I've gotten older, I really hate it. Can't do the texture. And then squid. The only picture I could find for squid was of them as a food item, but actually my main context for squid is having dissected one in Biolab, and it was terrible. I had to force myself to do it. It just like the rubberiness of it was awful. I have technically had calamari, but it was like breaded and stuff, and it actually tasted okay. I just couldn't get past the texture. So, yeah, bad textures. I don't want to dwell on this slide too much. Uh, food textures work a little differently. Sometimes something will be okay in my mouth, but not on my hands. As I mentioned, my mouth is much more sensitive to textures than my hands are. So, a general rule of thumb is that if I don't like it in my mouth, I will definitely hate having the same thing on my hands. But even if I don't like something on my hands, I might still be fine with the texture in my mouth. So like yogurt and ice cream, I really enjoy. They're very good, but I really dislike having them on my hands. Peaches and other stone fruits, I don't mind having on my hands, which is good because it'd be hard to eat them otherwise. And they're fine in my mouth too. And things like chocolate are good. And then bananas, I can't do either way. I really hate having a banana in my hands and forget about eating it. It's not going to happen. The other main aspect of my sensory issues is sounds. So I am really sensitive to noises to the point where this is one of the ones that I think interferes the most with day-to-day life, I guess. Because there's things like going to the theater and stuff that aren't as good. So like I went to see Dune 2 in the theater, and there's a particular frequency, a set of frequencies where if I hear them for too long a time and or too loudly, I get a really bad stomach ache. Unfortunately, one of the frequencies happens to be Hans Zimmer's favorite droning sounds, like the of like the ornithopters and then the theme music. So it was cool seeing it in theaters, but it was also super overstimulating because everything was really loud. And partway through, I got this really bad stomach ache because I was like hearing and feeling this tone at the same time, and it was bad. I had a blue raspberry slushy that I just kept sipping on because it helped, but that was not. It was, yeah, cool experience to watch that in the theater, but also uncomfortable because of the loud noise and the particular frequency. There's also a couple weird stories with insects. There was this one time I was walking on my college campus and I was hearing this little like, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And then I looked over at the direction it was coming from, and the only thing that was there was a bench. But I looked closer, and there was a carpenter bee eating the bench. And I realized as I got closer that its little eating was moving in the same rhythm as the clicking sound I was hearing. So I had been hearing this carpenter bee chewing on wood loud enough to bother me a little bit. It's just like, okay, well, I guess I can hear carpenter bees. That's fun. And that's not even the first time that something like that had happened. Like there was one time, a couple years before that, I was hearing a weird little click click, similar little click 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 on the ground at my feet. And yeah, it was a yellow jacket walking on the ground. It was fall, so they were dying. But yeah, I don't hear stuff like this all the time. It's just like if I'm by myself and it's quiet, I can hear the footsteps or the chewing noises kind of loud. Like it's weird. And it also depends on the angle. I discovered at a doctor's appointment my ear canals turn upward. I don't really know how to, but it's like kind of an unusual tilt. So I think part of it too is that they were both kind of below me, so they had I don't know, sound had a more direct route to my ear for the sensitivity to pick it up. So that's kind of weird noises. And because of this kind of sensitivity, like things that sounds really stress me out. Not all sounds, but like if they're loud enough, if they get too loud and it's really easy for sounds to be too loud, it gets really stressful. And I think the best way to think about this, I'm going to illustrate it here, sort of a cycle. So first, loud noises cause stress, and things will sound loud to me that are just very quiet to other people. So that can be hard to explain to, is like, no, this is really loud to me. Louder noise equals more stress, and then as I get more stressed, sounds actually start to sound louder. So it's kind of a vicious cycle where it's like the louder the sound is, the more stressed I get, and then as I get more stressed, my hearing gets more sensitive. So things are getting louder, and because they're getting louder, I'm getting more stressed. This cycle leads to sensory overload, and if I can remove myself from the situation quickly enough, it'll be okay. If I can get to a quiet room, if I can get like earbuds on or something, then I'll be okay. If I am in a situation, like a social situation, where I can't get out of it, sorry, this leads to a meltdown, and that's gonna get its own video at a future time.